In this lecture, we're going to explore what is considered to be a metabolic condition, and that's obesity. And obesity and overweight represent a condition on a spectrum that we'll focus on here in this unit. But the World Health Organization defines overweight and obesity as excessive fat accumulation, as such that it poses to be a risk for developing various diseases, or what are often referred to as comorbidities, diseases that occur at the same time as a result of a pre-existing condition. That pre-existing condition in this case would be overweight or obesity. A very handy way to determine if a person fits this category is through what's called the body mass index, or the BMI. And the BMI is generally calculated most commonly with the equation on the left, as the person's weight, or more appropriately indicated body mass, measured in kilograms, is divided by the person's height in meters squared. And that will yield a value that we will interpret on a chart later on in this unit. If the body weight is expressed in pounds and height in inches, then the equation on the right-hand side would be used, where the value 703 is used as a correction factor, so that these two different equations in different units will yield the same BMI value. Another way to track obesity and overweight in using that category in determining disease risk is by using waist circumference. And waist circumference for men above 40 inches, equal to or less, or equal to or greater than 40 inches, and for women greater than or equal to 35 inches, are generally indicated as those measures which start to carry an increased risk for various conditions and diseases. We'll begin by looking at the patterns of overweight and obese in the United States, since these data are most updated. And so we see a wide distribution of individual states that have varying percentages of their population that fit this category. And so we see with the states indicated mostly in the central part of the United States, the southwest, and along the east coast, that the percent of the residents in those states, the inhabitants of those states, are rank within the overweight or obese category, anywhere from 30% to more than 35% of the population. We see in other states, particularly Florida, some states in the northeast and the Pacific Northwest, along with California and Hawaii, we see a lower amount, a lower proportion of the population estimated to be in the obese or overweight category, with the state of Colorado and the state, really small here, Delaware, having the, Delaware, I believe that is, having the relatively lowest proportion of people in the overweight or obese category. And this chart here, this figure from your textbook, identifies the time-based patterns of the people. In this case, this refers to the United States, that fit these different categories. And so if we go back to the early and mid to late 1970s, we start to see the emergence of an upward trend of the percentage of people in the United States that are classified within the obese category. And so we see in the mid-1970s that the people classified in the obese category for men and women started to experience, and continues to experience into the 21st century, a sharp increase. Although the graph does not depict it, the number of overweight men and women, there's a very mild increase throughout the late 20th century, we can see here, and then it starts to increase with variable estimates throughout the 21st century. The interesting aspect with the sharp increase in the number of Americans that fit the obese category in the mid-1970s is that this occurred after the introduction, the wide introduction of fat-free or lowered fat food items in the food supply, in manufactured foods. And so in the early to mid-1970s in the United States, there was a very significant increase in those categories of foods. But what happened in that point is that the number of, or the proportion of Americans in that category started to increase in a sharp manner. As it relates to the body weight patterns in Canada, the statistics in Canada are fairly similar to those in the United States. And so if we go back to 1985, and these were data that were published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal in 2014, we see that the number of Canadians in the overweight category continued to increase beyond 1985, and then into the 21st century reached a fairly flat plateau. But Canadians within the obese category experienced, or the proportion of adults in the obese category had this steep increase throughout the 1980s, and then began to plateau, but throughout the mid-1990s, but then started to trend upward once again into the 21st century. And the obese category here is a compilation of all three obese classes, obese class 1, 2, and 3. And this graph is a little bit misleading because it suggests that the proportion of Canadians in the obese class 3 category and class 2 did not increase as much, but we're dealing with a different scale here, or the same scale for these other categories. So the number of, or the percent of Canadians, and hence the number of Canadians in these two subsequent classes, continue to increase throughout the 21st century. One way to track that is by tracking the percent change and not just simply the percent. And so this graph here demonstrates that if we recalculate these numbers as a percent change throughout the 1990s and into the early part of the 21st century, here we see that the percent change of Canadians in the Canadian adults in the overweight category did not seem to change very much. And we see that the percent change from 1990 throughout in obese class 1, in the obese category, overall, so the burgundy squares here indicate the overall category, but if we track the percent change of Canadian adults, we see the sharpest increases occur with those in the class 2 and class 3 categories. And this graph here is depicting a prediction beyond the data presented in the previous graph. And so the researchers here predicted with the open symbols. So here we see that we have data collected, or the researchers had data collected up to 2011 and attempted to predict out to 2015, 17, and 19 of the percent of adults, of adult Canadians, that would fit these different categories. And so the prediction indicated that beyond 2011, the percent of adults in the quote-unquote normal or healthy weight category would continue to trend downwards. We see that the prediction for the percent of adults in the overweight category would be fairly consistent, yet those in the obese category would continue to increase. And that occurs for both class 1, or not both, but for class 1, class 2 indicated by the X's, and the yellow plus symbols would represent class 3. And so, as I indicated here, 2011 represents that time where the researchers had the actual observed data, and they used those data to predict out to 2015 and subsequent. But we'll take a look at the numbers for 2015 from this one study. And so these data were captured in 2015 by the Canadian Community Health Survey conducted by Statistics Canada. And these data represent both men and women combined. And the researchers, out of the total population in 2011, estimated of those within the quote-unquote normal or healthy weight category represented 45.6%. Now, when we actually measured this, or when the researchers measured this in 2015, they found that the percent of Canadians in this category declined. Recall from slide number 7 that the researchers back in 2011 predicted a reduction, and when we got to 2015, the researchers actually established and proved the prediction that the actual percent did in fact decrease. The researchers also predicted a flat or the same percent of Canadians in the overweight category. What the actual data demonstrated is that it was it did increase, although very, very slightly. So the prediction was fairly accurate in this case, although the percent did go up by 1. In the obese category, the prediction indicated that there would be an increase in the percent, and in fact, when we got to 2015, the percent did in fact go up, as it did as we look into the obese category, and we separate it out by class 1. The prediction indicated that it would increase, and it did increase up to 17%. We see essentially a doubling of Canadians in class 2, and not quite a doubling, but an increase of Canadians categorized in class 3, often referred to as morbidly obese, the morbidly obese category. So that these data here suggest that the predictions were accurate and did match up quite well. Slightly off for the overweight, but this very small increase indicated that the prediction, although not perfect, was fairly accurate. So this ends our first part of our unit on obesity.